Welcome back to another episode of the Frustrated CEO podcast. My name is Patrick Lyons. I am one of your co-hosts here with my esteemed friends and colleagues and fellow co-hosts, Patsy Feeman. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
And Leb Tannenbaum. Welcome back to you, sir.
Thank you, Patrick.
Yep. Listener, welcome to episode 53. This is our most valuable episode yet. And we say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek because today's episode is all about corporate values, not just what they are, because I don't think we would honestly fill a whole episode on just talking about what they are, although we are going to cover that. But more importantly, what do you do with them when you have them? Now, stick around to the end because like every episode, we will have our key takeaways from today's episode that you can implement in your business starting tomorrow, what we like to call the Let's Get Practical. Let's start out with maybe a softball question, a little easy one. What even are core values? Why are people talking about core values? Why are the three of us doing a whole episode on core values? What are they and why are they important?
Okay. Well, everyone is saying they're important. And here's some of the things we hear our clients say. There are guideposts. There are, these are the lights in the dark that help us know what to do and how to behave. I've heard them referred to as tenets. I've heard them referred to as this is what we stand for. And I heard people talk about them as this is what we expect of each other. And this is what we live by. So core values for me came out of Built to Last, maybe 20, 25 years ago, where it was identified that if we don't have them, then how do we know when things happen what we do stand for, or how to behave, or how to respond to a client, a customer? So I'll pause there for a minute. It's a lot of companies have them. The thing that I always ask is, or I'll often ask is, well, when were they written? Oh, 20 years ago. Are they still relevant? Do young people or new people understand why they exist and what they are? So, and then we get into the how and the what. But let's pause for a minute. What else?
Well, that's a good question though. How? Because I think we often recommend to our clients, to companies, your core values aren't changing on an annual basis, right? It's not like you're like a strategic plan that you are constantly refreshing. Your core values aren't meant to change dramatically year over year, but how often do you revisit them? Or you've got that 20-year-old company with 20-year-old values. What is your guidance to a company, to a CEO who's listening, whose values haven't been touched in an extended period of time? How long is too long?
Well, I think it lives in some of the other things that we'll talk about, but it's do they matter? Do people understand them? Do new people understand them? Do we live by them? And a lot of times you get kind of a, or I don't know, or they haven't been, not that they're not still at the core important, but they may not be very alive.
Mm-hmm.
And the other side of the coin is I've walked into organizations where the core values are beautifully calligraphed and they're framed and they're behind the reception desk, and I have a 9 o'clock appointment and I'm sitting there at 9:25 going, really? This is respect. This is integrity.
Right. So if I hear you correctly, if I understand what you're saying, it's not so much that there's a shelf life on a value where at a certain period of time it needs to be changed or refreshed. It's more a continual evaluation, answering those questions that you asked a couple of minutes ago to determine, are our values alive here, or have they gone stale? Are they dormant?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you for that.
That's part of it.
Awesome. Patsy, what is the cost, since CEO's responsibility is to manage costs? What is the cost of not living your values?
Well, there's some real dollar and cents costs if you aren't hiring people that are in alignment or believe or find, want to live the values of your organization. You could often find yourself hiring people that are not the right fit.
Mm.
So your turnover could be high. So that's, dollar and cents cost. On the other end of the spectrum, every company has a public, reputation. So if, you're left waiting in the waiting area for 25 minutes and nobody's even said boo to you, then you get to be known as the company who keeps you waiting, doesn't live your values. So, and we've seen with our clients in the past, 3 years with the pandemic, some tough decisions have had to be made. And, I work with a small manufacturing company. They had some tough decisions to make. And at that, 11th and a half hour, they brought their values in and said, how are we making this decision in alignment with our values? They ended up making a fairly significant different decision based on filtering it through their values, and it turned out to be the right decision for them.
Mm.
So they can be used as a guidepost, as Leb said earlier, when making tough decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up, first of all, a few really good points. First, you led with hiring. We just did, the episode before this one, episode 52, Hire for Good, we had Suzanne Hannafin, the founder and CEO of Acumen Executive Search. That whole episode is dedicated to hiring for values, hiring for culture fit. I think it's the hire umbrella topic or point is hire for your culture fit. But how do they do that? They do that by working with their clients to understand the culture and the values, and then ask value-specific interview questions to hopefully get a good sense of how well will this person fit. Now, if that's not what you're doing, listener, and you're thinking, yeah, our process is good enough, it's too difficult to change it. To me, one of the more impactful things from those conversations with Suzanne was hearing that their retention rate, Patsy, you talked about retention and turnover. Their retention rate is 93% after 3 years, which is really high. So if you think about what is the cost, I'm amazed at how often organizations, CEOs, managers will turn over a position and be okay with the fact that they'll even say, that person just wasn't a good fit. It wasn't a good fit. Okay, so what are you doing to make sure the next person is a good fit? Because it's not the mistakes that kill us. It's making the same mistakes over and over and over. Hiring to your values is certainly one way to help make sure that you're not letting somebody go because they weren't a good fit. And
then the piece I'd add to that, and then I'd love to hear more from you, Patrick and Leb, is we hire we get the people that are in alignment with our values, so they're the right fit, but then we put them in an organization and we don't tell them what does it mean to live those values on a daily basis here.
Yeah.
And so, I'm a great fit, but what am I supposed to be doing? How am I supposed to be? And everybody on the team is interpreting our value of integrity differently. So you've got 10 interpretations of how does it behave living, with integrity. So it's a consistency and it's an alignment.
Yeah. It's supposed to help us ultimately. We're supposed to help us as members of an organization know how to behave in certain situations, know what's the right decision based on our values, like we were talking about. You bring the values into the conversation, even if it's towards the end and you realize maybe we are very aligned with our core values. Maybe we're not. Maybe we've been thinking about this in a fearful way. Maybe we've been thinking about this. This happened when the pandemic broke out. There were decisions being made that we tried to help at least point companies and CEOs back to their values, because there was, there was a lot of initial fearful memos going out because people were not going to be in the office and see each other in the way that they had before. But if we're operating with integrity, and we have been for a really long time, and we have a behavioral understanding on some language that helps us understand, well, what does that mean no matter where I'm operating from? That's I think what kept some CEOs up at night or frustrated, and why it's so important to keep them alive and recognize, without a behavioral description and maybe, constant supply of stories and examples, how do I know if what I'm interpreting or what I'm doing is in alignment with our values? So it's a little bit easier than just defining and saying, here they are.
So do one of you have a good example of living a core value, and then how in the moment, either the CEO or somebody on the team uses that behavior to make, choices about how they go forward?
Yeah. So as I was thinking about this episode, our friends at Blue Compass came to mind. So shout out to former guest on the show, the CEO, Drew Larson. Drew Larson, right? I'll have to edit that. What was it, Drew Larson? I think it's Drew Larson. Drew Hansen. Okay. The CEO of Blue Compass joined the show. And do you remember, I looked this up because I remembered, I was like, oh, this will be a good story to tell. One of their values is, it basically goes, we don't tolerate gossip and drama. And so you talk about the decision-making process. When they moved into their current space, do you remember that he talked about this on the show? When they moved into their current space, the decision was to not have doors on the offices, because they didn't want anything to happen in secrecy. They didn't want it to appear as though, they didn't want to give people the opportunity to, among other reasons, or just to foster communication. But he said it's really hard to have drama and gossip in a room with no door. It's just, it's how their values inform the decision that they made in actually designing the workspace that they're in. And Leb, you're a master at this. I want to hear your story, your example as well. You are a master at this. I was thinking as you were talking a minute ago, Leb, I've been in rooms with you. I've been in meetings with CEOs, clients, senior leaders, where topics get discussed and decisions get made. And then it's like you ride in at the end and you ask this question, and it always makes everybody stop and rethink everything we just talked about. And that is, well, what do your core values say? Like, well, what do your core values say? And it's such a simple question to ask. What do our core values say? Okay, so here's the decision. Like, okay, we're designing the space. We're designing our workspace. What do our core values say? We're about to hire somebody. What do our core values say? We're designing a compensation program. What do our core values say? And it's not the only input, but it certainly can't be a forgotten input. Yeah. It should be the lens through which. So I feel like I have stolen that question from you, because I've asked it in my own conversations and meetings with clients and CEOs and leaders. And it always, it's like the needle on the record that just kind of like it stops the conversation where people have to think, oh, I don't know, what do our core values say about the decision that we made or the conversation we just had?
Well, one piece of work comes to mind, and when we were in New York City in a large transportation organization, and there was a core value around collaboration and cooperation, only to find out that at certain times that was about the last thing people wanted to do with certain other key team members. And it came out in some pretty odd ways, but some of it came out in withheld communication. Now, they also had a core value around safety. And when you're working around trains and subways and things like that, lives are at stake. And the one of the years I was working there, there were a lot. I won't say the number, but there were deaths underground on subways.
Mm.
And when they did the analysis, it was pretty clear that the communication, collaboration, core value was not as alive as it needed to be, and was the source of some accidents that were preventable. So then, frustrated CEO, then you have to look at what is the leader's response. How do you reinforce the importance, maybe without shutting the organization down? Things like that come to mind. Construction companies, safety. There's some form of a core value around safety.
Mhm.
Safety can be physical, but it also can be emotional and mental.
Mm.
So you have a great supervisor on a construction job, and someone comes to the CEO and says, we're on track, we're going to make our numbers, we're going to, all of that, but he's berating and belittling people, or she's berating and belittling people on a regular basis. Well, it doesn't feel like a safe space.
Mm.
So it's kind of getting into the analysis, but also on the support side, using stories for a good purpose.
Mm.
Let's look at something that's preventable. How can we, and even using inquiry, how can we do better to bring this value to life in a stronger way? And probably, every area of a company, we have stories that we can tell. And stories are powerful in terms of bringing them to life. What was the person at the reception desk that I was sitting there waiting, she might have no control, or he might have no control over the schedule. But would the client value have caused that person to initiate and say, "I'm so sorry, can I?
Yeah.
I'll go back and check," or would you like some water? There are behaviors that say, "Oh, okay, I get it. They are living their values, and this is, not a great day.
Right.
I'll come back," or "I'm never coming back." And that's how important core values are in the marketplace.
Yeah. You see that. There are the companies that come to mind. Gosh, you can Google. There are so many examples of where, like, it's 2023. People are communicating with everybody and anybody when they don't have a positive experience with your company. They're just sharing that information. And the cost is so much greater. Patsy, you were talking about the cost. It's like you lose customers, you lose market share, and some of those customers never come back. You lose brand reputation. You can lose vendors and partners because you're not honoring and living your core values, and then they just become a joke, right? People walking around the company going, yeah, integrity, that's a real big value here, instead of really internalizing it, owning it, and committing to living it. To me, I always think about values. You've heard me say this probably in other episodes. Tools are always better when they're mirrors and not hammers. So your core values are not my weapons to walk around the company and beat you over the head and say, "Leb, you need to show more integrity. You need to be more respectful. You need to be part of the family." It's me asking, where do I need to show up better? How can I be a better family member if that's our value? How can I have more integrity? I challenge anybody to, when your answer is, "Nope, I've got it all done," okay, then you can start going around asking everybody else to be better, but start in the mirror first. Patsy, you mentioned decision-making and you mentioned hiring. What are
Mhm.
some other areas? What are other ways? Because the point of this episode is to help you, our listener, figure out how do you bring these to life. What are other ways that a CEO should be thinking about leveraging their core values in the business?
Well, what immediately comes to mind is the person sitting in their own seat. So if they look at their leadership first, since the CEO, everybody watches the CEO, everybody wants to emulate the CEO. So it kind of goes hand in hand with what you're just talking about is how do I show up consistently living the values?
Hmm.
That's great.
Because that's your responsibility
Yeah.
as a CEO.
That
Lead by example, and hopefully you and your executive team are all leading by example. So that's the first place I'd start, with the person sitting in the CEO seat. The next couple of places I would go is, and you've mentioned this, is how do we communicate that? Is living our values consistently communicated? You'd mentioned before we got started today, Patrick, how do we reward and recognize people that are living our core values? And then that carries on to training and development, that, they're integrated into all the training and development. We worked with a construction company recently, and they actually had the employees determine what were the behaviors that went with each of their core values. And one of their core values is accountability. We could each come up with what does that mean? And it was so powerful, because then when they'd have their annual meetings, they actually had tables where each core value was represented as a table, and they had the employee of the year, that best example of that. And I found that to be really powerful when it was created among the troops and then broadcast out. So those are a couple of other places. We mentioned when you're in crisis, decision making. I think also it could be used in performance management.
Mhm.
I'm really passionate about that one. Best practice that I've seen is that you're measuring you're measuring my performance 50% what I do and 50% how I do it. So the what is the tasks. How am I doing at the functional aspects of my job? Am I right? If I'm the receptionist, am I good answering phones? Am I good at greeting people? Am I good at managing the calendar? And then there's 50% of my overall evaluation that is based on how I show up.
Yep.
So it's the what and the how. And I always say this, the how should not be some arbitrary list of values or behaviors that I think are important in that role. It should be through the lens of your core values. Otherwise, why have them? So if everybody in the company is measured against those behaviors, right? Whatever those core values are, that's how you set a consistent expectation and standard for behavior, for how we're going to treat each other, how we care about each other, how we show up for each other, how we lead by example. So, and why is that so important? Because every listener, I promise you, every listener either has somebody or can think of somebody in their past they've worked with who killed it on the what and sucked at the how, right? Those are those high performing jerks. And I submit to you that the cost, let's go back to the cost to the organization of keeping a high performing jerk. Actually, I would argue that's really not a high performer, but we see it as though they're killing it in the functional tasks. So we think of them as high performers because we forget, okay, that's 100 over here and a 0 over here on the how. That's a 50, right? That averages to a 50. That's an F. We don't need you.
Well, you're also remembering the one thing I would additionally add is, in terms of, and we talked about reward and recognition, one way to recognize somebody is to promote them. Typically in business, we promote people because they are good at what they do. And we
Yes.
forget to bring in the how, but the higher you get in an organization, the how you're doing it becomes even more important than the what you're doing, because
Yeah.
you're impacting a lot more people. And I was just talking to an HR manager recently. She's like, but he's a really good performer. Yeah, but nobody likes to work with him. Yeah, but he's a really good, but nobody. So it just was like, put him on somebody else's team. That's a big cost, because it's not only just that one employee. That talk about, that's your internal reputation.
Yes.
We only promote high performing jerks around here.
And it happens. It happens. And you're exactly right. No one works in a vacuum. So if I'm a high performing jerk in a leadership role, everyone in my organization is suffering because of it.
Yeah.
Everyone is struggling to navigate through my again, lack of, and by the way, how then can the company or I hold anybody in my organization accountable for living and leading these values when I'm not? It's what you said, Patsy. It's why the CEO, our frustrated CEO, needs to start in the mirror and model it first. Well, the same goes for your high performing jerks. Again, I use high performer as like very loosely there, because they're not. Lev, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking of a lot of things. Well, I'm thinking of how important it is that we do live to the core values. And one example that came to mind is being called in to help develop a CEO's executive team. And one of their values was along the lines of do what you say you'll do. Like, my yes is yes and my no is no.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the CEO cancels the majority of one-on-ones with every executive on their team, like 3/4 of the time, and there's my yes is yes, my no is no, or it's a form of integrity, you're screwed in terms of team development, because what they're thinking, it varied from, I guess I'm just not as important as I thought I was, or maybe I'm not performing too well, or oh, poor CEO, he's so, or she's so overworked, has to cancel all the time. But whatever is going on there, in that left-hand column, the things that people are thinking is inhibiting high performance teaming. And it is in some way, shape, or form not living a value. The thing that fascinates me in public companies is how well-intended you can be in living your core values, and the pressure to return financial rewards to the shareholders. How do you do that when you have a core value around sustainability? And a lot of companies are doing really well with that. But I think it's like what Patsy said, they're putting the core values into the decision making. They're putting the core values into the culture fit, and they're using the core values to actually help develop the culture. And they're telling stories. They're telling the good stories and the mistake stories, and people are realizing, especially if it comes from the CEO and the executives, they're telling stories about when they've failed, when they've made a mistake and had to come back around and correct it. Because none of us are flawless. Yeah, I don't want to work with a high performing jerk either on a regular basis. And what is it? Here's another one that's always funny to me. The core values are on the side of the vehicle for the company that's driving on the highway. And the driver's cutting people off, or leaning on the horn, or yelling, sticking their head out the window and yelling something to somebody. And here's this company name and these values. That's an exaggerated example, but it's no different, in a quiet office.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I was thinking about alignment. If, for instance, an organization was 50% aligned, so they're 50% inefficient, 50% aligned, and by starting to live their core values in the way we're talking about here, daily, through behaviors, through consistency, and you even increased your alignment by 60%, by 10%, so you're there's, go back to your dollar and cents question from beginning, Patrick. There's a great financial reward
Mm-hmm.
to living your core values.
Agreed. Agreed. Well, is it time maybe to get practical?
Yeah.
What do you think? I know we don't like doing that here, but we do it anyway. No, it's our potentially our often our favorite part of the show, because if nothing changes, nothing changes, right? So, listener, this is the part of every episode where we want to give you practical things you can do, easy steps that you can take in your organization to start making inroads in our topic today, which is in this case bringing your core values to life. So, Patsy, I see wheels spinning. Would you like to go first?
Sure. I think core values need to be specific, memorable, and simple. That's one thing.
Nice.
And if you're the CEO or in the C-suite, you demonstrate your core values by leading by example. It's your responsibility.
Good.
I'll start with those two, and then I'll see.
Let's circle back and add one at the end. Okay.
Yep.
Add more at the end. Okay. Lev, what do you got?
I think I would start with ask yourself and others if they understand how to behave to bring that value to life. Another is tell stories that are heroic and great about someone who did something fantastic to help bring that value to life, and tell the stories where someone or yourself fell short and what you learned.
Oh, I love that.
And I'd say the third which is what Patsy mentioned, just if you're in a leadership role, if you're the CEO, there are times when tough decisions need to get made. Use your core values to help you make those tough decisions.
Yep. Good.
Patrick.
All right, I'll go. So, and maybe this is a branching off of that, but I feel like we gave our listener the question to ask. The takeaway is, ask that question in every conversation, every meeting that you're in. What do our core values say about this? It's just such an easy, practical way to start bringing your core values to life. Early on, we talked about just creating your core values isn't the end of the exercise. It's just the beginning, right? So yes, you need them. If you don't have them, our encouragement is create them. If you do have them, Leb, you said, make sure that they're still relevant, that they are alive. But that's not the end. That's not a checkbox exercise. That's just the beginning. Now you've got to do the work of bringing them to life in the organization. And then the last one is, I don't know if you could tell, but I'm a little passionate about the whole what and the how conversation. So use your values to evaluate performance in the organization, not just the what, but the how. And that how should align to your core values. Otherwise, why have your values? But just commit to no high performing jerks.
Good.
So I'm going to add an addendum to the first one I started with. So I said they needed to be specific, memorable, and simple.
Okay.
So that everybody in the organization knows how to live by them.
I like it.
Yep.
That's it for me.
Okay. Leb, any more you want to add?
Use them when you're onboarding new people.
That's good too. Yeah.
And when you're hiring.
Great ones. Yep. And for more on that, go back and listen to episode 52.
Yes.
You can hear all about that in Hire for Good with Suzanne Hannafin. So excellent. Thank you both. You are you're fantastic colleagues and foils in this process, and you're two of the smarter people I know. So thank you so much for bringing your insights and wisdom to episode 53.
You as well, Patrick.
Thank you both.
Thank you. All right, listener, thank you for sticking with us to the end of episode 53, our most valuable episode yet. Feel free to visit thefrustratedceo.com, where you can download this episode's companion, Let's Get Practical, the thing we just did, as well as all of our former Let's Get Practicals, and all of our old episodes are there as well. We appreciate it if you like, and if you like this episode, please give us likes and shares, give us comments in whatever podcast platform you're listening. And if you'd like to be a guest on The Frustrated CEO, please reach out to any one of us. All three of us are on LinkedIn, as well as if you do a search in LinkedIn for The Frustrated CEO podcast, you'll find us there. I think that's it. Anything else for the good of the cause?
No, thank you.
All right. Excellent. Listener, thank you. We will see you again next time on The Frustrated CEO podcast.